The gunship shook itself around us as it dropped through the clouds. Harness straps bit into my shoulders. The cabin lights were down to a dull red glow, enough to show faces but not much else. Across from me, Digby rolled his shoulders like he was about to walk on stage instead of into a quarantine zone. That was his trick. Treat every drop as a routine patrol, and maybe the universe got bored of trying to kill you. He caught me watching and raised his brows. "Last-minute confession, Cap." He tapped the side of his helmet. "You finally going to tell me this is all a training exercise and we get to go home for once? You want a training stamp? Pick another unit." I checked my wrist display again, even though the briefing was burned into my head. Harrogate Station, high-altitude research and mining complex. Reported biol leak 2 days ago, comms scrambled since. Security switched to non-lethal at Central's request, which was stupid. We go in, secure perimeter, identify source, extract any intact data and high-value survivors. No heroics. Copy. No heroics, Digby grinned. So only minor, tasteful heroics. Scott snorted from the next seat down, fingers tightening on his rifle. Boffin checked his magazine for the 3rd time. Shin sat still and upright, eyes half closed, lips moving around a prayer he would deny later. My hand drifted to the inner pocket of my vest, to the dog tags under my own. Old mission, old ghosts, old mistakes. I pulled my hand back before Digby noticed. The pilot's voice came through our helmets, flat and calm. "Foil, we are 30 seconds out. Exterior sensors show minor structural damage. No active fires, no visible hostiles. Automated gun towers are online but tracking skyward. Friendly code accepted. Pad Alpha is clear." "Copy." I unlatched my harness. "Masks on, rifles hot. Standard containment rules. We keep seals tight and do not play medic unless I tell you." There were nods all along the bench. No one bothered with words. We had done this too many times. Usually the scenery changed. Sometimes the uniforms of the people we were pulling out changed. The smell of burned disinfectant and bleach, the quiet afterward. That part stayed the same, mission after mission. The ramp dropped. Cold air slapped the cabin. We rose as one and trotted down into a world that was too quiet. Harrogate's landing pad jutted from the side of the mountain, like a tongue of concrete. Beyond it, the valley opened under a washed-out sky, ringed by jagged rock walls and crowned by sharp peaks. The station spilled across the basin floor and up the slopes in tiers of housing blocks, power spires and industrial sheds, all facing inward toward a central tower that held admin and the main med wing. I had expected smoke pillars, bodies, quarantine tents, the mess we usually walked into when a pathogen got loose in close quarters. Instead, I saw chipped concrete, one toppled cargo container, a few shattered windows, no movement that was not us. "Where is everybody?" Scott's voice came in my ear. "Inside," I answered. "Masks on, move." We crossed the pad in a staggered line. Turrets on the outer towers rotated as we passed, tracking the sky and the distant gunship as it banked away to circle on standby. Their barrels stayed level, something to be grateful for. The outer door accepted my command code. The lock cycled with a heavy clunk and a slow grind. Interior security screen. 95% of station residents unaccounted for. Official population just under 3,000. Casualty estimate unknown. Inside the first corridor, my suit's external temperature reading dropped. My visor display tagged faint traces of disinfectant compound smeared across the walls in uneven swirls, as if applied in a hurry. We moved past an abandoned checkpoint. The ballistic shields there were bent outward, not inward. Stun rounds lay scattered across the floor like spent seeds. No blood, no bodies. Non-lethal. Digby shook his head. They tell rent-a-cops to play nice against an unknown strain, then call us in when it goes wrong. One day I want to meet whoever writes these protocols. "You have, several times," I muttered. "He was offering us medals." He chuckled once. The sound died quickly. Ahead, the corridor opened into a plaza between housing towers, benches, planters, A few dropped bags and a stroller overturned on its side. No people. I raised a fist and dropped to one knee. The squad fanned out and settled behind cover. Thermals? I kept my voice low. Shin scanned with his visor overlay. Nothing moving topside. Some heat signatures under us, through the floor. Could be utility lines. Or someone beneath. Digby had his rifle to his shoulder already, tracking invisible enemies. Admin is center tower, yeah? Yeah. I pointed toward the main structure. We cut through this level. Push straight to Med and admin hub. Secure what we can. Stay sharp. We were 2 blocks in when we met the first infected. He stepped out from behind an overturned municipal truck as if he had been waiting for us. Male, mid-30s, wearing station security armor with the logo half scraped off the chest plate. His face looked too smooth, like he had been sleeping well and eating better, eyes bright and fixed. No visible wounds. If I had met him in a canteen, I would have asked how he stayed so fit on station food. "Defense Biohazard Command," I called, rifle low but ready. "Drop your weapon. Get on your knees. We can help you." He smiled. That was the first wrong thing. The second was the way he raised his hands. Too fast, too precise, fingers splayed just so. The third was how the plates on his forearms bulged, skin stretched over muscle ridges that did not match any training diagram I had ever seen. "Help!" His voice came clear, unstrained. "We do not need help." Digby shifted beside me. "Cap." I flicked my hand down. The squad aimed stun launchers, foam-tipped rounds meant to knock down an average adult without permanent damage. "On the ground," I called. "Last chance." He tilted his head, as if listening to a note only he could hear. "You are late." Then he moved. He did not charge the way a regular person would. There was no wind-up, no warning. It was like he went from standing still to halfway across the plaza in one frame of film. Concrete chipped under his boots where he pushed off. "Fire!" Foam rounds smacked into his chest and arms. He staggered half a step and kept coming. Boffin stepped in front of me and took the brunt of the impact, armor plates clanging as the man hit him chest to chest. Boffin was a big man, heavy with gear. The infected lifted him off his feet like he weighed nothing and swung him sideways, slamming him into the side of a parked crawler. Boffin's scream cut short. I saw his arm bend the wrong way at the elbow. Scut fired point blank into the attacker's back. The rounds chewed cloth and punched through armor. The man jerked but did not drop. He turned, eyes wide and teeth bared, one hand clawing for Scutt's rifle, the other lashing out in a backhand that caught Shin across the helmet and spun him to the ground. I stopped thinking and squeezed my trigger. My rifle kicked against my shoulder. I walked rounds up his spine toward the base of his skull. Short, controlled bursts drilled into my bones over years. This time, flesh responded the way it should. Vertebrae shattered. He folded, dropped to his knees, then hit the ground face first and did not move. The whole fight had taken barely more than a breath. The plaza held the sound of own breathing and the faint whine from my rifle's barrel as it cooled. I stepped in carefully, boot hooking under the man's shoulder to roll him over. Up close, the differences stood out. His neck looked thick, cords of muscle pressing against the skin. The forearm plates that had caught our rounds were swollen, bone clearly denser under the flesh, with faint ridges running along them that had not been there when that armor was issued. His pupils were wide and slow to shrink when my helmet light brushed them. He had died with a look that was not pain so much as annoyance. Shin knelt beside Boffin, fingers probing at the broken arm, then glancing up at me once. I did not need a medic to tell me that arm was out of the fight. New rule. Non-lethal is off the table unless we are dealing with unaltered civilians. Anyone gives you a reason. You aim center mass and you do not stop until they drop. Digby huffed. "You heard the man. Stun guns go away, real guns come out. Station command can write an angry letter later." No one complained. We patched a brace around Boffin's arm and dosed him with painkillers. He refused to stay behind, and dragging him with us was safer than leaving him exposed in the plaza. The closer we drew to the central tower, the more the station felt wrong. There were skids of cargo abandoned mid-transfer, doors hanging open, comm panels smashed. We saw signs of struggle, clear arcs of impact and shattered plastic, but still very few bodies. "What are the counts?" I asked. Shin checked his display. "Population number is still the same. Comms are blocked on local. My readers pick up heat, but it is spread. No normal clusters. Could be cold enough here that we are just reading machinery. We would still see people if they were in groups." His voice stayed level, but the line of his neck had gone rigid. "Unless they are not in groups anymore." I knew what he meant. Panic breaks crowds into little units. Terror makes them cling together. The absence of either was its own message. The medwing sat off the base of the tower, built from clean white plasteel and glass, 2 floors up and 2 floors down. Its doors were wedged open with an overturned gurney. There were drag marks on the floor, dark streaks left by something heavy being pulled inward. "Standard wedge," I ordered. "We sweep room by room." The reception area looked like every other clinic I had seen in a dozen postings. Check-in kiosks, potted plants that no one had watered in a while, flat screens frozen on public health messages. Someone had dragged a desk in front of the hallway leading deeper. It was snapped in half. We stepped over it. The first few rooms were empty. Beds were made, equipment stacked neatly. Handwritten notes still clung to clipboards at the foot of mattresses. The further in we moved, the more the calm broke down. We found a ward where all the beds had been pushed against the walls, sheets knotted into makeshift restraints hanging from the rails. Most of those restraints were snapped. In one isolation room, there were gouges in the floor where someone had tried to anchor a frame. The metal bolts had been sheared off clean, as if twisted by a hydraulic press. The main isolation suite lay at the end of the hall behind a reinforced door. A thick viewing window ran almost the full width. The frame bent outward, just enough that I could see the metal had been forced as much as cut. Inside, a man lay strapped to a heavy treatment bed. His skin shone with sweat. He wore only shorts, his chest bare under straps that were thicker than my wrist, buckled to anchor points sunk deep into the bed's frame. His body did not match the T-chart of normal human anatomy that lived in my memory. Extra bands of muscle pulled across his ribs like crude ropes. Bone pressed up in ridges along his shoulders and upper arms, creating natural armor plates that had no business existing in a human adult. His face was almost unchanged. That was the worst part. He could have been anyone. Blue eyes, hair shaved for a surgical prep, stubble, a thin scar by one ear. The only visible change was a second set of eyelids, translucent, that slid across his eyes with a quick, insect-like motion when our shadow crossed the window. He looked straight at me. "You are late," he spoke, voice muffled by the glass. "The last team never made it inside." Digby shifted beside me. "We have a live one. Do we go in?" "We go in." I toggled the intercom. "This is Captain Foyle, Defense Biohazard Command. You have been exposed to an experimental biological agent. We are here to secure the site and help anyone we can. Do you understand?" Those inner eyelids flicked again, fast. "I understand better than you. You should not have come." "Who are you?" He smiled. It looked painful, the way the muscles in his cheeks fought against the new ridges along his jaw. "Name's Tallis. Security shift lead. I volunteered. They told us we would be stronger, faster, burn out slower. Thought it was a joke until the first changes hit." "Where is everyone, Tallis?" "Gone," he answered. "Changed. Like me. More than me. They left me because I was still talking. For a while." There was a console next to the door. Shin worked at it with quick hands, bypassing the lock. I kept my rifle trained through the window. Safety on but ready. "How long since you lost contact?" I used the question to keep him talking, give Shin another breath of time. Tallis lifted his head as far as the neck strap allowed. The movement made veins stand out along his throat, thicker than they should be. "I do not know. Hard to track time when you hear everything. Their footsteps in the walls, their hearts, the wind moving around the vents. It all blends. My shoulders tightened. You hear hearts? Yours. His gaze moved from me to Digby, then to Shin, as if he actually could. Strong, nervous, angry. Shin muttered under his breath. He cannot hear that. Focus on the lock. Tallis, we are going to sedate you and move you to a secure facility. I already tried that. His laugh scraped. They pumped me full of drugs. Heart slowed, lungs labored. Muscles stopped listening. The strain did not care. It adapted. It is still adapting. His hands tightened against the straps, tendons standing out like cables. You cannot hold it. You cannot hold us. An alarm chirped from somewhere deeper in the ward. For a split second, my head turned toward the sound. The reinforcement on the door frame groaned. Tallis arched his back and ripped one arm free of its strap. The buckle sheared, metal snapping like brittle plastic. The unexpected force made Shin flinch and his fingers slip on the console. The lock remained red. "Move!" I shouted. We never got the door open. Tallis tore himself loose faster than we could react. He rolled onto his side, the remaining straps stretching to the limit. The tendons in his neck stood out as he twisted, muscles bulging in ways that made no anatomical sense, ribs expanding, skin whitening where it stretched too far. The last restraint snapped. He hit the floor on hands and knees and launched himself straight at the window. The glass bulged, then shattered in an explosion of shards. He came through trailing straps, bed frame crashing behind him. Shin staggered back, arms thrown up to protect his face. Tallis met him mid-step and drove him into the wall. I had a half-second frame. Tallis's hands, fingers longer than they should have been. Knuckles reinforced by bone ridges, wrapping around Shin's rifle and bending the barrel away like soft metal. The noise of Shin's head connecting with concrete. Then movement blurred. Scut stepped in, pistol up. Tallis swung one arm and knocked him across the hall. Digby lunged from the side, driving a shoulder into Tallis's ribs, trying to tackle him down the way you would a regular person. It worked for almost the length of one breath. Tallis folded, then flexed. He rolled his hips and came up, lifting Digby off the ground using only his back muscles and one arm. I put 3 rounds into his torso. They hit, but his momentum did not stop. He hurled Digby into a steel trolley with such force that the trolley collapsed flat. He turned toward me. Up close, those extra eyelids flicked fast, protecting his eyes from rubble. Veins stood out along his temples. Another bone plate had begun to form along his collarbone, pushing skin aside in pale arcs. I did not bother with center mass this time. I took 2 more steps in, raised my rifle, and poured rounds straight through his face until skull fragments hit the floor. He toppled. My ears rang in the sudden quiet. My visor muted the worst of it, but years of firing in enclosed spaces had left their own mark. Digby groaned from the tangled trolley. Shin sat slumped against the wall, visor cracked. Scut lay on his back a few meters away, gasping, one leg twisted. "Check yourselves," I ordered. "Look for breaks in suit, breaches in filters, any open skin, you tell me." We patched the squad together as best we could. Nothing more serious than bruises and a few small cuts. No obvious exposure. That did not mean much, but it was something. Shin managed to get the isolation room's console dumped onto a portable drive. Among the medical logs were charts for something labeled Ascension Strain A. I loaded one on my wrist screen. Vitals over time for Tallis. Heart rate, lung capacity, muscle strength, everything climbed over days instead of dropping. Bone density doubled, then tripled. Reaction time tests moved from average to beyond anything human. There was no crash point marked. The last entries stopped after a line that read, "Subject no longer responds to verbal stimuli." On the margins, someone had written the same words several times in different pen strokes, as if they could not decide whether they believed it. Enhanced. Whatever had broken loose in Harrogate did not make people sick. It made them better, stronger, faster. Then it kept going. "Cap." Digby shifted, one hand on his ribs. "We got what we came for here. Admin hub is the next logical step. I nodded. We move. Stay away from restraints, I added, glancing at the snapped straps around Talis's bed. They do not hold. We left the clinic through a side exit that opened into an elevated tramway. It curved around toward the central tower, suspended above an open courtyard. Below, cargo carts and small electric trams sat abandoned along rails. Eyes up, eyes down, I reminded the squad. They like vertical moves. Almost on cue, movement flashed in my peripheral vision. Figures dropped from the balconies above in arcs that were too smooth to be natural. I had a flash of modified limbs, bent knees, and elbows twisting beyond safe angles to absorb impact. Incoming! The first infected landed on the tramway railing and used it like a springboard, vaulting over Scutt's head to come down behind him with a kick that folded Scutt's legs. Another hit the tram itself, boots punching dents into the metal as he ran along the roof, firing a station security pistol with one hand, while the other gripped a support beam like a climbing animal. They were coordinated. They moved like a trained squad, using cover, crossing fields of fire, exploiting angles. Someone had drilled them even after the changes started. The world compressed to muzzle flashes, ricochet sparks, the sharp drumbeat of impacts on armor. A host's skull burst under sustained fire. He toppled over the railing, body spinning toward the courtyard floor below. Another swung under the tramway, using fingers that had grown hooked ridges instead of nails to cling to the underside, then reached up to grab Boffin's ankle and haul him off his feet. Boffin cried out, grips slipping. He hit the edge and slid, boots kicking empty air. The host tried to drag him over the side. Digby threw himself flat, grabbed Boffin's vest and hauled, muscles standing out along his arms. I shot the host in the wrist, then the face. It kept its grip for 2 more rounds before its fingers loosened. Boffin scrambled back onto the walkway. The host's body fell, limbs pinwheeling, and struck a moving cargo sled below. The collision sent the sled skidding sideways. It slammed into another, their combined mass mashing a third vehicle against a wall. Metal shrieked. One of the hosts used that chaos like he had planned it. He kicked off the grinding sled and hurled himself straight up toward us, catching the tramway support with his hands, climbing hand over hand faster than most men could run. Shin shifted position to cover him. The host swung one hand in a quick, casual motion, flinging a dropped grenade upward. It bounced off the railing beside Shin. Down! I threw myself backward. The blast ripped through the walkway, tearing out a section of metal. When my hearing crawled back, my head throbbed in time with my pulse. A third of the tramway hung twisted, one end canted downward, cable snapped. Boffin did not answer roll call. I did not ask for a repeat over the open channel. I saw the gap, the shredded edges, and I knew. By the time we reached the admin hub door, there were fewer boots in our group than when we had left the gunship. That was how these missions usually went. This time, it bothered me more. The admin hub still had emergency power. Consoles glowed with warning messages. The main command terminal recognized my authorization code, but most external links were blocked. A message window flashed on my visor. Command? Status? I swallowed tiredness and typed with my thumb. Foil. Hot zone more active than brief. Hosts enhanced, not weakened. Strain labeled ascension. Med logs show increased muscle, bone density, reflexes. Loss of verbal response in late stages. Request updated rules of engagement and authority to downgrade site from rescue to full containment. Command came back faster than I liked. Command, site already under full containment. Blast doors sealed remotely 1 hour ago. Automated towers set to engage any outgoing contacts without authorization. Orbital support on standby. No evac authorized until threat fully assessed. Your unit's orders, assess, contain. Confirm if orbital action required. I read it twice. They had sealed the valley before we landed, locked the doors behind us. Our gunship could lift off, but it had nowhere to go. Every tunnel out of Harrogate would be shut, every tower pointed inward at anything that tried to break free. I typed again. Foil. You locked us in. Command. You are the only assets on the ground trained for this. We need your eyes, your judgment, my judgment. The same judgment that had stumbled once years back and left 2 squads dead and 1 man alive who still refused to talk about it unless he had to. Cap? Digby leaned on the console next to me, visor up. We getting out? Not yet. I closed the channel before Command could feed me more comforting lies. Doors are shut across the valley. Nobody in, nobody out until we turn the threat off, or they decide to drop something heavy from orbit. How heavy? Scott's face had gone pale under his helmet rim. The kind that leaves a crater and a story about an unfortunate industrial accident. I checked the floor schematic for Harrogate. The paths blurred together, a maze of corridors and shafts that no longer matched reality in my head after what we had seen. The strain came from somewhere. There is a research wing below this level. We find it. We pull their records. We cut the problem at the root. And if there is no root, Digby asked quietly, then we make one. I glanced at him. Gear up. We go down. The cargo concourse looked like a throat halfway through swallowing something it could not handle. It used to be a broad, open space where trucks and loaders moved between the industrial sector and the core tower. Now the walls bulged inward in spots, layers of pale, fibrous material growing over the original cladding. That new growth had the sheen of uncured bone and tendon. Metal railings were caught in it at odd angles, locked in place like flies in amber. We had to squeeze through a gap between 2 such bulges to enter the concourse proper. The edges had a give under my gloves. I'm going to pretend this is some contractor's awful insulation job, Digby muttered behind me. Otherwise, I will start thinking too much. Do not think. Just shoot. I kept my rifle up and moved along the left side, keeping a stack of crates between us and the open center of the concourse. Above us, walkways crisscrossed under the high roof. Hosts moved there, shadows with the wrong weight, pausing to peer down with eyes that glinted through helmet visors or bare faces. They did not rush us immediately, which somehow felt worse. This all grew since the leak. Scott's voice wavered. Looks like. Shin's visor overlay painted faint traces of heat through the growth. The strain likes ribs, tendons, cords. It is reusing whatever it finds. Metal, plastic, bone. Save the lecture, I cut in. We cross. We secure that security office on the far side. We get eyes. The first incoming host came swinging down from a support beam, using limbs that bent too free at the joints. His feet caught a hanging cable and he treated it like a jungle vine, using it to arc over our heads. His hand shot out, snagging Scott's sling, jerking the rifle out of position. Scott cursed, dropping to one knee, trying to recover. Digby snapped a shot upward that caught the host in the thigh. The impact spun him but did not drop him. He let go of the cable and landed on a crate stack in a low crouch, one hand braced, bone plates along his shins taking the hit. More hosts followed, sliding down support struts, dropping from catwalks. The concourse lit up with muzzle flashes and the stutter of automatic fire. The new growth on the walls took rounds with dull thuds, leaving gouges but holding. We moved in short rushes. Shoot, sprint, drop, cover. A host whose ribcage had expanded into a crude chest plate ran straight at me through a hail of bullets. I switched to armor piercing and aimed for the gaps between his ribs. 3 shots later, he collapsed, chest folding inward with a strange, wet crack. By the time we reached the security office, my arms felt like they were made of heavy rope and my throat burned. We slammed the door and locked it manually, dragging a heavy desk in front of it for good measure. The office overlooked the concourse through armored glass. From here, the altered architecture looked like a frozen wave mid-break. Hosts moved through it with ease, climbing along bone ridges, squeezing through gaps that should have been too narrow. There were fewer every minute. Most had either fallen under our fire or slipped into side shafts to regroup. Shin dropped into a chair at the monitors. Cameras are still up in some sectors. I can pull internal feeds. I leaned over his shoulder. Images flicked through. Clean corridors, untouched by growth. Others where new flesh had erupted from vents and floor seams. And in several labs below, earlier footage stored in buffers. Project Ascendant. The title card sat at the top of a folder tree. Under it, dates and codes. Shin selected the first entry. A man in a white coat appeared, seated at a lab table. Dr. Pavel Kazic, according to the subtitle. Age somewhere in his 50s. Tired eyes. He spoke in that clipped, careful tone of someone recording for a committee. Phase 1 Ascension Trials. Volunteer cohort of Harrogate security personnel and heavy machinery operators. The strain promotes rapid musculoskeletal reinforcement and metabolic efficiency, allowing greater work output with lower fatigue and improved hypoxia tolerance. So far, subject well-being is high and incident rate low. He talked about gains in muscle strength, endurance, healing time, about volunteers finishing shifts with energy to spare, about minor cosmetic changes dismissed as acceptable side effects. As the entries progressed, language shifted. Strain, host, behavioral adjustment. Shin skipped ahead. Communication difficulty with late-stage hosts who exhibit increased focus on group tasks and decreased responsiveness to individual instructions. Another skip. Control signal generator nearing calibration. Once synchronized, we expect to be able to trigger developmental pauses or, in emergency, total tissue ablation in all hosts tied to the Ascension strain. Control signal generator. Emergency ablation. Someone had built a kill switch into this mess. Shin opened a text file linked to the video. Authorization lines, funding sources, one logo I knew too well. Defense Biohazard Command. My organs felt like they shrank in my chest. I should not have been surprised. New toys needed field tests, remote mountain facility, disposable workforce, plausible deniability. Send in the containment team when something breaks. Learn from it. Adjust. Cap. Digby had taken off his helmet. His hair stuck to his forehead with sweat. You seeing what I'm seeing? Yeah. I stared at the screen. Our chain of command paid for this. Why send us in here? Scott's voice came from the doorway, thin but controlled. If they wanted everything to burn, they have those rods in orbit. Just flatten the place and call it done. Why risk us? Because they need someone to look at the mess and tell them how well their toy worked. The words tasted sour. We are not just the mop-up crew. We are the observers. I reached up and popped the latch on my helmet's live feed. A small icon that had been green went grey. Command would still hear my audio if I opened a channel, but they would not see where I looked or what we were watching unless I let them. A small betrayal, and later I would have to explain it. If there was a later. I turned away from the monitors. There is a control device in the lower labs. If they built a kill switch, it is there. That is our new objective. We reach that generator, we figure out what it does, and we decide whether to use it. Decide. Digby rubbed the heel of his hand under his ribs. The motion had started to look like a habit instead of a response to impact. As in you decide. I will take suggestions, I answered. But yes, it lands on me. Shin ran a quick pathfinding algorithm over the station map. Most direct route was down through the industrial lifts, but the concourse below looked like it had been fully taken by growth. There is a maintenance tunnel system under all this, he pointed. Cargo lifts, cable runs, fluid lines. If we take those, we avoid open ground, and maybe avoid whatever is using that concourse as a playground. Fine, I clapped his shoulder. Pack what you can. We move in 5. We did not talk much on the way to the tunnel access. There was not much to say that would improve anything. The hatch to the maintenance level sat behind a stack of pallets. We shifted them aside, popped the lock, and climbed down a steel ladder into dim light. The air felt heavier here, not thicker in a cliché way, just filled with the layered noise of a station's hidden life. The rush of fluids through pipes, the rattle of cable brackets, the occasional clunk from somewhere overhead. The tunnel was barely wide enough for two men side by side. Cables ran along one wall, pipes along the other. Floor plates rattled under our boots. Sweat trickled down my back under the armor. We moved single file, weapons up. Shadows ahead stretched toward us, bending around corners where the tunnel hooked right or left. Every now and then something skittered overhead, above the junction of pipes. After a while we started to hear voices. They did not carry clearly, just a low murmur, a rise and fall. Enough to tell there were people ahead, talking to each other. I held up a hand and we slowed. The tunnel widened around the next bend, into a small chamber where several branch lines met. Someone had turned it into a nest. Equipment had been pulled from the surrounding area and piled into a rough barricade. Tool chests, crates, panels, all welded and fused together with the same bone-like growth we had seen upstairs. In the center, a cluster of men knelt and sat close, some bare-chested, some in half-shredded station coveralls. I counted at least 8 hosts, maybe more behind the barricade. They looked more altered than Talis had, but less than some of the creatures we had fought in the concourse. Extra ribs had sprouted along their sides like spare hoops in a warped barrel. The curve of their skulls had thickened, brows heavy enough to serve as shields. Hands were broader, fingers a little longer, nails beginning to hook. They had built a small ring around one man in particular, who sat propped against a crate, a portable console resting on his knees. His lab coat was stained and torn, but it was still a lab coat. Dr. Pavel Kazik looked up as we stepped into view. His eyes focused on me without confusion. When he smiled, the skin around his mouth tugged against new growth that had started along his jawline. "Captain Foyle." His voice was dry. "I thought they might send you." Hearing my name in that place felt like someone pulling a pin on an invisible grenade. My rifle stayed trained on his chest. "Hands where I can see them, Doctor. Everyone stays exactly where they are." The hosts around him tensed. Some shifted, weight rolling onto the balls of their altered feet, but they did not charge. Kazik rested his hands on the console, fingers spread, showing me his empty palms. They were knotted with new tendons under the skin. "You are not surprised this happened?" "I am exactly as surprised as someone in my job is allowed to be." I flicked my chin toward the nest around him. "This your idea of a break room?" He looked around at his people, and there was something like pride in the glance. They built it together. Efficient. Protective. The strain encourages cooperation as much as individual enhancement. We thought that part might interest your employers. You built a weapon and lost control of it. Digby's voice came from over my shoulder. That part is what interests me. Kazik's gaze slid to him, lingered on the name taped to his vest. Staff Sergeant Saeed, survivor of Katura Gate incident. I read your file. My teeth came down hard before I could stop them. That incident was where my extra dog tags had come from. The file should have been walled off. The fact that a lab lead in a mountain station had seen it told me just how deep our command's fingers were in this project. You read too much, I snapped. You want to tell me why Ascension hosts are using security tactics and climbing like circus acrobats instead of dropping like normal sick people? They are not sick. He shifted his shoulders, as if his own altered bones were stiff. They are improved. Their bodies adapt, strengthen, reorganize. We guide that growth with targeted compounds and exercise regimens, or we did, until Central's little scenario began. The what? He tapped the console with one knuckle. Containment loss drill, ordered from above. We were told it would be controlled. Simulated breaches, dummy rounds, train the hosts under stress, train security in response. See how quickly we could corral the enhanced workforce if they panicked. Then we lost command of the control generator and the hosts began to follow each other instead of our commands. After that, he opened one hand in a small gesture, as if the word destroyed was too ordinary to fit. You expect me to believe Central staged this? I expect you to believe they knew it might happen. His eyes sharpened. Because you know them. I did, that was the problem. Where is your control generator? I asked. The kill switch. His gaze flicked toward a tunnel beyond the nest. Lower, under the core lab, a living device tuned to our strain. It broadcasts a signal that tells the altered tissue to grow, pause, or, if we must, self-destruct. It still listens to us. For now. For now. A chill, the real kind, crawled along my neck. Can you trigger a full burn? He drew a slow breath. His chest moved with a crackle where new ribs rubbed old. Yes. Then you're going to walk us down there and do exactly that. The hosts around him stirred. One growled, a rough sound deep in a chest that had more space than before. Kazik lifted his hand a fraction. They quieted. You really want to push that button? He studied my face. Those men you killed in the concourse. They were my early volunteers. They had families up station. Some of them were ready to retire. The strain gave them 30 more years of work and 30 more years of life. You want to burn them because you are afraid of what comes next. I want to keep them from tearing through those blast doors and into the world beyond. My voice came out lower than I meant it to. This strain does not stop on its own. You know that. Yes. He did not flinch at the accusation. Which is why we built the control device. Not just to kill, though. That was your people's addition. His expression hardened. We designed a pause function, a way to freeze development at a chosen stage. Imagine a cohort of enhanced workers or soldiers whose growth we could stop right after the optimum point. Not mindless monsters, something better. Too late for sales, Digby muttered. Not necessarily. Kazik's gaze returned to me. You are here. The generator is still active. Some of my hosts still listen. The situation is not beyond rescue. Something skittered in the vents above us. I tensed, gun rising a hair. The hosts did not react. They must have been used to it. Cap, Scut whispered near my elbow. This is a lot of talking when we could be moving. He was right. My orders were to assess, contain, and, if necessary, authorize orbital fire. Not to debate ethics with the man who had built the match that lit this place. I am done here. I took a step forward, rifle aimed at Kazik's sternum. You are coming with us, Doctor. Any of your hosts who so much as twitch wrong, they go down. We clear? You will not make it past the next junction. The more advanced hosts do not listen to me anymore. They listen to each other, to the strain itself. They feel the generator like you feel gravity. You will be fighting uphill the entire way. I have done worse. It was a lie, and we both knew it. His eyes softened the tiniest bit, pity creeping in at the edges. You really do not see it. I had had enough. Hostiles, I ordered. The first round caught him in the chest. His body jerked, then slumped against the crate. The console slid from his knees. Around him, his hosts howled, the sound scraping along my nerves. The chamber dissolved into close-quarters chaos. The barricade limited their angles, which helped. We had better weapons and training. They had bone plates and reach. Shots cracked, bodies hit, metal rang under heavy impacts. In the crush, one host lunged toward me with his forearm raised like a shield. A jagged spur of bone jutted from his wrist. I deflected his arm with my rifle, but he turned the motion and slashed sideways. I saw the arc of the strike. I did not see where it landed. Behind me, Digby grunted. The host pivoted to follow up. Digby drove an elbow into his throat and took him down, then put 3 rounds through his modified skull. Cap, left. Scutt's shout pulled me back into my own fight. The rest of that engagement blurred. When the last host dropped, my body logged small injuries I had not had time to notice. A bruise along my ribs. A scratch on my neck where something sharp had glanced off my collar. We took stock. We were battered and winded, crumpled in the clutter of the nest. Shin knelt by the wall, fingers pressed to his helmet as he checked his vitals. Scut sat with his back to the wall, helmet off, sweat running in lines through the grime on his face. Digby leaned against the barricade, breathing hard. There was a tear in his sleeve, just above the forearm. A thin line of blood ran from it, winding down toward his wrist. "Let me see," I motioned. He pulled back a little. "It is nothing, just a scratch." "Arm out." He obeyed, more out of habit than agreement. The cut was shallow, barely more than a dug-in scrape. The skin around it looked a little puffy, but that could have been from the impact. No obvious foreign material, no rubble. We had all taken hits like that 100 times in training. We had not been fighting living weapons then. I cleaned it with a wipe and sealed a band around his forearm. "Keep it covered. If you feel anything off, you tell me. No bravado." He tilted his head. "Define off." "Different from the usual, stupid." He smiled once, quick. "Then you will be the first to know." We moved on. The tunnels grew more distorted the closer we drew to the core. Growths like those in the concourse had forced their way into the service space, curling along pipes, knotting around brackets. Floor panels had buckled where new bone structures pushed up from beneath. Climbing down a final ladder, we dropped into a staging bay just above the core labs. The space must once have been a simple transit point for cargo and staff. Now it looked like someone had taken a regular loading dock and let it ferment. Struts of calcified tissue arched between original supports. Pallets sat fused into the floor by creeping growth. A few early hosts lay torn apart around the edges, bodies shredded by gunfire or claws that had not come from our side. We took cover behind a stack of crates that had remained mostly intact. Shin checked his tablet. "Core lab is 1 level below. Elevator is gone." He pointed at a shaft where the lift had stalled halfway down, its carcass split by growth, cables tangled. "We have to use the emergency stairs, through that door." He indicated a hatch across the open floor. Digby flexed his bandaged arm. The muscles under the sleeve rippled. "You all right?" I asked. He hesitated a heartbeat longer than I liked. "I am better than all right." "How?" He opened and closed his hand. The movement looked a hair too smooth. "It does not hurt anymore. It feels tight, charged almost." I stared at the band. "You are not a power conduit, Digby." "Maybe I am now." He flashed teeth. "Look, Cap, we already know this strain boosts people. Maybe I took a light dose. Maybe that helps us. Seems stupid not to use whatever edge we get." "You are talking like Kazic." "I am talking like a man who wants to get home." His gaze held mine. "You need someone to punch through. You know who it is." Before I could answer, movement stirred at the far end of the bay. Hosts poured from a side corridor. These were further along than the ones we had fought so far. Their limbs had stretched, joints reformed at slightly different angles to give them better reach. Bone ridges covered most of their torsos, a crude, natural armor. Some carried weapons, held with a new, casual strength. Others came empty-handed, trusting their bodies. "Positions!" I barked. We met them at range. The first wave dropped, bodies piling. The ones behind used those as cover, bounding over fallen comrades with unsettling grace. A host thudded against our crate stack and climbed straight up its side, fingers digging into wood. Digby stepped out from behind cover, almost casual, and met him head-on. He moved differently. His timing was perfect, like he had rehearsed the sequence 1,000 times. He stepped inside the host's reach, caught its wrist, turned his hips, and used the host's momentum to throw him to the floor. Bone plates cracked on impact. Before the host could recover, Digby dropped a knee on its throat and wrenched its head until something snapped. He flowed back to his feet in one smooth motion, eyes bright. "That was new," Scott breathed. "New is good." Digby shook off his hands. "Come on then, who is next?" Another host lunged. Digby met him with a rising kick that would have been reckless for a normal man in armor. His foot caught the host under the chin, lifted him. A follow-up shot from Scott finished the job. The fight turned on that point. With Digby acting as a wedge, we held the choke points and pushed the hosts back towards the corridor they had come from. One tried to flank us, climbing along the growths on the wall. Shin tagged him mid-climb, and he fell, limbs twisting. After what felt like an hour but could not have been more than a few minutes, the last host dropped. The bay returned to its previous wrong quiet. We counted our people. We had lost one more. That left me, Digby, Shin, and Scut upright. Digby's chest heaved, but there was no tremor in his hands. He looked like he had just finished a training circuit, not a near-death brawl. Remember that scratch? He flexed his bandaged arm. Under the ceiling band, the shape of his muscles had changed. Lines stood out in new ways. There is your edge. Scut stared. That is not normal. That is the point. Digby turned to me. You know we need this, Cap. You cannot turn the strain off yet. We have not even seen the generator. Use me while you can. Protocol hammered at the inside of my skull. Standard containment. Identify infection, isolate, neutralize, any exposure in the field, immediate termination. No exceptions. I had executed those orders before. I had watched men drop under my own hand, and I had told myself it was the only sane choice. That was before I had walked into a valley sealed behind me, with command lines that led back to the same people who had funded the strain. You feel like yourself? I asked. He considered. I feel clear. His gaze found the door to the emergency stairs and lingered. I can almost hear them down there. Not voices, just movement, pressure, like the station is breathing from the wrong place. I did not like that. I liked it even less that we might need whatever instinct he was developing. Scut shifted his weight. Cap? We cannot get to that generator without something new. Those things are getting worse every level. If we put Digby down now, we might as well sit here and wait for the orbital strike. He did not disagree. This was the moment my fear had been waiting for since the drop. The place where one choice could save everyone or doom them. The part of me that still woke some nights with Keturah Gate in my head wanted to default to the manual, cling to it like a shield. Kill the exposed. Call in the rods. Walk away if command let us. Except there was nowhere to walk. We were already in the fire. I looked at Digby. You are infected, I said. No point lying to either of us. He nodded once. Yeah. I should put a round through your skull right now. He held my gaze. But you will not. Do not be so sure. Because, he went on, you know you cannot get through the next level without something like this, and you trust me more than you trust whoever is riding a desk back home. He was not wrong. I holstered my pistol. You stay in front with me. If you start losing yourself, if you stop being you, you tell me. If you cannot tell me, I will know, and I will not hesitate. I would expect nothing less. He gave a small, crooked smile that was entirely his. You know, Cap, for a guy who hates improvising, you are getting good at it. Shut up and move. We pushed through the hatch to the emergency stairs and began the last descent. The air grew hotter as we went down. Real heat, rising from machinery and whatever living mass surrounded it. The staircase spiraled along the interior of a shaft. The walls, once poured concrete, were veined with hard growths that had forced cracks in the original material. Every few flights, a landing opened to a narrow access hall with a closed door. Behind some of them, we heard movement, scraping, the dull thud of something heavy shifting. Nothing broke through while we passed. Digby's pace never faltered. He took the steps like the strain had put a spring under each foot. Occasionally he would pause at a landing and lean toward one wall, head tilted, as if listening to a faint song. Then he would pick a direction. Left, he muttered once. We go left here. Right will be a kill box. I did not ask how he knew. We followed. On the final landing before the core level, a section of wall had broken away entirely, revealing a gap into a side corridor. Inside, advanced hosts moved in patterns, guarding an approach we were not taking. Bone armor covered almost every vulnerable surface on their bodies. Their extra limbs had grown into fully functional extra arms, ending in hands as strong as clamps. I watched them through the gap. "Could we have handled that?" Scut whispered. "Not like this," I answered. "We took the right path." Digby's mouth twisted. "You are welcome." The core-level door had been forced open by growth. Bone struts had grown through its panels and pushed them apart, curling back to create a twisted frame. Beyond, a broad hallway sloped gently downward toward a bright, open space. I stepped through. The core lab reactor chamber was the most quietly horrifying place I had ever seen. The room stretched wide and tall, its ceiling lost in shadow. The original structure had been a circular lab with observation platforms and control stations on different levels around a central shaft. That shaft now held the generator. It rose from floor to ceiling, broader than a shuttle fuselage, built from a fusion of hardware and living tissue. Plates of dull metal and composite were bolted into and around a thick column of bone-like material, veined with red and grey. Cables sank into it like feeding tubes. It throbbed with slow, heavy pulses, each one moving up and down the column as if some immense heartbeat inside. Around the chamber, on balconies and along the walls, dozens of Ascension hosts stood or crouched. Some clung to bone pillars that had grown from the floor and ceiling. Others perched along the curve of the upper ring, limbs splayed in positions that would have dislocated normal joints. They watched us. None moved to attack. The skin on my arms tightened. "They are waiting," Digby murmured. "For what?" Scut whispered, too loud in the hush. "For me." Digby's voice came softer. He stepped forward. "Hold." I reached out automatically. He glanced back at me. His eyes looked almost normal in that light, but something rested in the set of his jaw and the way the muscles around his neck moved that had not been there before. "They brought us here, Cap," he said. "We have been walking down a slope since the pad. Now we are at the bottom. That is not comforting. Was not meant to be." He took another step, then another, toward the base of the generator. Shin moved to a console near the entrance and began to work. "I can access something from here. Interface is half organic, half mechanical, but the software roots look familiar enough. Give me a minute." "You have it," I answered, eyes never leaving the hosts above us. One of the advanced ascended, if that was what they were now, shifted on a balcony. His body was a map of the strain's work. Extra ribs created a cage over his shoulders and upper arms. His spine had grown new projections that ran parallel to the original, making him look as if he had two backs fused. His face had flattened slightly, nose shrunk, brow extended. His eyes stayed locked on Digby. Digby walked to the generator and stopped within arm's reach. Up close, the living part of the device showed more detail. The skin covering it looked pale and tough like cured hide. Here and there, small openings gaped, ringed with bone. Around those, the flesh had patterned itself into concentric ridges that looked almost machined. Digby flinched. His right hand went to his ribs. Under the armor, something moved. He grunted and dropped to one knee. His breathing came faster, not from exertion, but from whatever was going on inside him. "Talk to me," I called. "What is happening?" "It feels like pressure, like the inside of my chest is trying to line up with that thing." He drove his fingertips into his side. "I can hear it better now." "I would really appreciate you using different words," Scut muttered. Small bumps appeared along the inside of Digby's forearm, under the bandage. They grew, stretching the material until it split. White nubs pushed through his skin, shedding blood like dew. The sight turned my stomach in a way our earlier fights had not. This was not a stranger's body. This was my friend in front of me, coming apart to make room for something new. The nubs kept growing, fast. In the space of a dozen heartbeats, they had lengthened into short, thin spines of bone, each one capped with a darker, hardened tip. They lined up in a pattern that matched a cluster of the generator's openings. I did not like that I could see the similarity. I liked what came next even less. Digby stared at his arm, then at the generator, then back at me. "This is what Kazic was talking about," he said. "Interface. It is expecting a host. It built me for this." He laughed once, without humor. "Look at it, Cap. Look at me. You think this is a coincidence?" I did not answer. There was nothing useful to say. Shin looked up from the console. "I am in. There are 2 main command pathways. One labeled burn, one labeled lock. Burn does what it sounds like. Sends a kill signal through every thread of this strain. Host tissues ignite from within, quick, thorough. The other... Lock, I finished. Freezes development at the current stage." He chewed his lip. "That is what the notes suggest. No more growth, no more changes. It would turn every surviving host into what they are right now. Stable, static, bound to whatever control anchor they are linked to, likely the first host that connects." Digby's gaze had gone distant, fixed on the generator. "That would be me," he murmured. His presence in the room shifted. The hosts along the walls leaned forward, minutely, as if listening harder. "Burn kills them all," Scut said quietly. "Everyone who has any of this in them. Lock saves them and leaves this, whatever this is. Lock creates a new species," Shin added, "confined to this valley as long as we trust the blast doors and towers. They would be tied to you, Digby. To your call." "Your command," I said. He shook his head. "Not command, partnership. A knot they cannot untie. I would feel them, like I feel that thing." He nodded at the generator. "They would feel me. We could keep them here. We could keep them calm. You talk like this is a future you want. Is it worse than dropping rods and vaporizing everyone?" He met my eyes. "You told me once you were tired of being the cleanup man for other people's experiments. Here is your chance to do something else." The radio in my helmet crackled. A cold voice cut through. "Captain Foyle, this is command. You have gone dark on visuals. We are re-establishing audio. Report status." I almost laughed. Just when my life needed more strain. "On site at Core Lab," I answered, not bothering to hide the exhaustion in my tone. "Generator located. Confirm Ascension strain has a control device with 2 options. One burns all hosts. The other freezes development and leaves them alive. Static, then. Burn protocol is authorized. Lock is not. You will trigger burn and confirm when all host life signs have ceased." "Understood." The word came out by reflex. Digby turned his head, slow. His expression was unreadable. "Orbital assets are in position," command continued. "If you fail to initiate burn within the next 10 minutes, or if any Ascension host breaches the valley perimeter, we will release rods." "Rods will kill everyone here," I answered, "including my men. Your men knew the risk when they deployed." No sympathy, no hesitation. "Greater good, Captain. You know the calculus." The channel cut. My hand ached around my rifle grip. Somewhere in the back of my head, a much younger version of me was shouting that we had been here before. Different place, different virus, same equation. Back then, I had hesitated when that calm voice asked for my judgment. I had tried to find a third option. By the time I picked one, it was too late. The outbreak had breached and the rods had fallen. The casualty count still lived in my nightmares. Now here I was again, in front of another device built to end an experiment gone wrong. The difference was that this time, one of the hosts under the crosshairs wore my squad patch. "How sure are you about Locke?" I asked Shin. "As sure as I can be without running a live test," he answered. "The interface says development freeze, not tissue destruction. The control signals are distinct. And burn, that one is simple. Once I hit it, there is no undo." The generator throbbed, heavy and slow. The hosts above shifted, restless. Our time was shrinking, and the valley overhead was a target. Digby stood and stepped closer to the generator. His new bone spines lined up with a cluster of openings. "If I connect," he said, "the lock option will anchor on me. I can feel it, like a door waiting for a key." "You trust what you are feeling?" "I trust that the strain wants a conduit." He flexed his fingers once. Kasich built this as a partnership. Your people added the burn as a knife at the end. Locke is closer to the original intent. Original intent was enhanced workers who do not get tired and follow orders without question. Soldiers who do not refuse. Laborers who do not complain. This was never about them having a say. And now they do, he answered. You saw them upstairs. They were organized, coordinated. They built nests. They protected each other. That is a kind of society, whether we like it or not. Do not start dressing this in philosophy, I snapped. They tore our people apart. So have regular men, when someone told them to, he shot back. Silence dropped between us for a long, tight moment. Make the choice, Cap, he went on. Burn me and everyone like me. End this in fire, go home and write a report, or lock us in and trust me to keep them here. Either way, you get containment. Just not the kind command wants. He was offering me a way to refuse the neat, clean answer that involved killing everything and leaving a scorched bowl in the mountain. He was also asking me to trust that whatever the strain turned him into would remain on our side forever. There were no guarantees either way, only different kinds of risk. I thought of the men I had already lost in this valley, of Boffin, left behind on that upper floor, of Scut and Shin standing 10 meters away, clinging to their sanity, of the people who had volunteered for ascension because someone like Kasich had promised better lives, of Digby, who had followed me into hell more times than any sane man should. Shin, I called. If I put down Digby and hit Burn, how sure are you the rods will not fall anyway? He hesitated. Not sure at all. Command wants a clean field. They said if any host breaches or if you fail to act, they might read Locke as failure and Burn as not enough. I think they already see this place as dead, Scut added. They were right. Our bosses had already written Harrogate off. They wanted data and an empty crater. I looked at Digby, at the generator, at the hosts above, who watched us with a focus that did not feel human, but was not mindless either. Every mission I had ever run, every casualty I had signed for had been framed as part of a larger arithmetic, a ledger where numbers balanced. Now I saw that ledger clearly for the first time, and I did not like the hands that kept it. Hook in, I ordered. Digby blinked. You sure? No, I answered. But I trust you more than I trust them. He nodded once. I will take it. He stepped close to the generator. His new bone spines lined up with the openings. He pressed his forearm in. The connection was not subtle. His body jerked as if someone had run a current through him. His back arched, muscles standing out along his neck and shoulders. The generator's surface bulged slightly around his arm, as if drawing him in. The pulses along the column sped up. The hosts above moaned in unison, a low sound that made the metal structures in the room vibrate. On the console, variables shifted. New lines bloomed across Shin's display. I have Locke, Shin called. It is ready. Just one command. After that, the signal goes. Digby's voice came strained. Do it. He stared at me while he spoke, not at the console, not at the generator, at me. In that moment, he was still himself. Still the man who had dragged me out of blast radius once, who had sat beside me in the quiet after Katura Gate when everyone else had gone. The man who had carried my guilt in silence because he understood it without needing words. I lifted my rifle. His eyes widened a fraction. I am sorry, I said, and I meant it more than I had meant anything in my life. I fired one round. It took him clean through the forehead. His head snapped back. His body sagged against the generator. For half a heartbeat, his arm remained embedded in the living surface, bone spines locked into their holes. Then his weight pulled him away. The generator's pulses went wild. Shin shouted something. Scut cursed. The hosts above screamed. The sound tore at my ears, raw and furious. I dropped my rifle, lunged for the console, and slammed my hand down on the burn command. Then the generator flared from within. Light burst through cracks in its surface, a fierce white glare that left afterimages on my retinas even through visor filters. Heat punched out from it in a wave, a solid wall that drove me a step back. The living columns split along its length. Fire rushed up and down its core, racing into the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The hosts on the balconies convulsed. Lines of light traced along their veins as if someone had poured molten metal into their arteries. They arched, limbs flailing, then stiffened. Flames burst from their mouths and eyes, from the seams where extra bones had grown under their skin. One by one they dropped, falling from perches to crash on the floor below, already burning. "Move!" I grabbed Shin and yanked him away from the console as the screens burst, showering sparks. We ran. The hallway outside the chamber was already warping. Growth along the walls shriveled and blackened, then burst into sheets of flame that crawled along every vein. Advanced hosts in the corridors spasmed, their bodies igniting from within. Some staggered toward us, arms stretched, faces contorted. We ducked around them or shot them as we passed. Heat built fast, trapped in the confined spaces. My armor's internal systems struggled to keep up. My skin prickled under the plates. We reached the stairwell as an explosion tore through the lower level behind us. The shockwave threw us against the wall. Scott lost his footing and slid down a few steps, equipment rattling. We climbed. Below, the burn raced through Harrogate's bones. Above, something heavier began to build, a deep, distant rumble that matched no internal system. Scott looked up through the central shaft. "Is that—" "Rods," Shin gasped. "They are dropping rods. They did not wait for confirmation." The words came out strangled. Of course they had not. Maybe they had never intended to. My trigger pull on burn might have been nothing but a data point in their larger plan. We burst out onto an upper level, then into a corridor we recognized from our descent. Growth along its walls was already collapsing into char and ash. Through a distant opening, I saw the sky burn. A line of light speared down from above, too bright to look at directly. It disappeared behind the ridge of the valley wall. A second later, the ground under us bucked. The world roared. The rod must have hit near the center of the basin. It drove straight through station infrastructure and deep into the mountain bedrock. Heat and pressure turned everything around it into vapor and fused stone. The shock rolled outward like a blunt fist. Ceilings cracked, floors heaved, support beams snapped. The corridor ahead of us bent like a straw, panels popping. We ran anyway. Doors blew off their hinges. A heat wave chased us, roaring down the tunnel. For an instant, the temperature warnings on my HUD screamed red. We reached a side access hatch that opened to a service tunnel leading toward the outer perimeter. The hatch had warped, frame twisted by the shock. Shin and Scott threw themselves at it. Metal groaned. It gave just enough for us to squeeze through one at a time. Behind us, the station groaned like an animal taking its last breath. We stumbled through the tunnel, half running, half falling, carried by momentum and fear. The floor snapped downward once as something under it collapsed. Dust filled the air, thick enough to turn our helmet lights into short cones. I do not remember the exact route we took. Later, when I tried to map it, it unraveled. I know we went up and out, and that at some point there were no more walls around us, and we were scrambling over fractured rock toward a sliver of daylight. When we finally burst into open air, the sky above Harrogate was clear and clean, as if nothing awful had ever happened under it. The valley below was gone. Where the station had been, a broad, shallow bowl yawned, its floor glazed in a fused sheet of dark material. The blast had smoothed out the structures, erased corners, blurred edges. Small tongues of flame still licked at the edges where loose rubble burned itself out. Heat shimmered above that surface, distorting the air. As it cooled, the fused layer took on a dull sheen, like glass mixed with slag. No growths, no hosts, no intact buildings. Just a scar. Behind us, a line of temporary structures had already sprung up along the ridge. Command tents, medical stations, portable turrets. Men in hazard suits moved between them. We had climbed out onto the edge of a world that had decided the valley was gone and was already writing its reports. Hands caught my arms, voices pressed close. I let myself be guided toward a medical tent. Inside the tent, a medic scanned us with portable instruments tuned to pick up biological anomalies. Needles, cuffs, readouts. He worked quickly. "Any exposure?" his partner asked. "Radiation spike is minimal at this distance," the first medic answered. "Heat injuries, bruises. Nothing we cannot handle. No active ascension markers on the scanners." His device passed over my forearm. For a moment the display flickered. The medic frowned, adjusted a setting and passed it over again. "Glitch," he muttered. "Base hardware did not like the shock. Numbers look normal." "Then clear them," his partner replied. "Command wants debrief as soon as they are upright." They bandaged a cut above my eye I had not noticed. Patched Scutt's cracked ribs, gave Shin a shot for the tremor in his hands. Someone handed me water. I drank without tasting. After a while, a major with neat hair and a clean uniform stepped into the tent. His face held the careful neutrality of a man who had practiced it like a craft. "Captain Foyle," he greeted me. "I am here on behalf of Command to take your preliminary statement. I understand you initiated the burn protocol before orbital support was deployed." "Correct." My own voice startled me. It sounded worn and distant, like it came from the far end of a tunnel. "Generator destroyed. All hosts in range burned from the inside. We barely got out." "Good." He tapped his tablet. "Containment successful." I stared at him. "Is that what we are calling it?" I asked. His eyes flicked up at the tone, then back to the screen. "We will need a full written report. Details on host behavior, growth structures, the generator's response. For now, Command requires a simple confirmation for the record. Is the Ascension outbreak fully contained within the Harrogate impact zone?" I thought of Digby, standing before the generator, offering me a choice, of Kazik in his nest, explaining his project with tired pride, of Tallis in the clinic, hearing heartbeats through walls. Beyond the open flap of the tent, the new crater caught late sunlight. The fused surface shone in places, dull elsewhere. In one spot near the center, the material had fused into a jagged column that rose just above the surrounding glassy field, like a knuckle pushing up. I flexed my hand. Pain pricked along my wrist under the bandage. I lifted my arm, pressed fingers against the wrap. Something small and hard shifted under the skin, running along the bone like a buried splinter. It did not hurt much. It felt like a promise. I lowered my hand. "Yes," I answered. "The outbreak is contained." The major nodded and typed. As he walked away, I slipped my fingers into my inner pocket and closed them around the two sets of tags there. Mine and Digby's. Metal edges dug into my palm. Outside, the last of the heat coming off the crater rippled the air above that fused basin. The valley would hold no life for a very long time. On my wrist, under clean gauze, something new sat quietly, waiting for its chance to grow.